Hello everyone, welcome to another technical session on Thought Data's Enterprise 360 Unified AOps Observability Solution Platform. In this session, we're going to talk about agentless server monitoring functionality in Enterprise 360. All right, so let's get started. Enterprise 360 software solution provides full-scale agentless server health monitoring. Using Enterprise 360, you can monitor any kind of any servers which are there inside your IT environment. These servers can be physical servers or they can be virtual servers. And the virtual servers can be running in private cloud or in public cloud, any public cloud for that matter, running as compute instances. And servers can be, again, Linux operating system, all flavors of Linux operating system or Unix operating systems, including Red Hat, Fedora, CentOS, various Linux flavors, older versions of Unix platforms like HP UX, IBM AIX, all kinds of Unix operating systems are supported in Enterprise 360. And these servers can be running different kinds of applications as well. The monitoring happens at the operating system level, so it doesn't really matter what kind of application is running on these servers. Enterprise 360 also does agentless monitoring for Windows servers, and it can be again running any kind of Windows operating system, starting from way back from 2008 server to 2012 server to 2016, 19, and the latest series of Windows servers. Everything is covered. And the methodology of monitoring all the Unix-based systems is using SSH. And the solution components which are required are at the basic minimum level, you need an infrasense sensor from Thought Data, and you also need an Enterprise 360 software solution. The infrasense sensor is the one which actually does the remote monitoring and collects all the data from the servers periodically and sends it to Enterprise 360. And both the InfraSense and Enterprise 360 are dedicated virtual machines. They are running over the Linux Ubuntu operating system, and they will remotely connect to the Linux systems using SSH. And the methodology of monitoring for Windows systems for agentless monitoring is the WMI protocol, which is the Windows Management Instrumentation. And if you want to do agentless monitoring for Windows-based systems, you also need an additional component, and that component is called as InfraSense WMI Poller. The InfraSense WMI Poller is a piece of software solution which runs on Windows operating system, and it polls all the Windows devices over remote WMI protocol and collects all the information and sends it to the Linux InfraSense system for processing the data. So if you were to do only Linux-based machines remote monitoring or agentless monitoring, you only need virtual InfraSense on Linux operating system. But if you intend to do both Windows-based operating systems remote monitoring and Linux-based operating systems remote monitoring, you would also need an additional component for Windows, which is the WMI Poller software, which runs on the Windows operating system. And this WMI Poller software, you can install it on any Windows machine, any desktop Windows machine, spare Windows machine. You can actually put it up and set it up for polling the Windows servers. And the prerequisites, let's take a look at the prerequisites. It is also important to mention that Enterprise 360 also supports full-scale agent-based monitoring. So if you intend to do agent-based monitoring, we're going to discuss that topic in a subsequent session and focus the topic on agent-based monitoring, how you can do server monitoring user agents. Typically, we recommend customers to do agentless monitoring, which does not cause any kind of overhead onto your servers. All the monitoring happens remotely and passively. But in certain circumstances where you feel like implementing WMI or anything is complicated and you want to install agents, or SSH is not enabled on Linux systems and you want to do agent-based monitoring, we fully support agent-based monitoring for all Unix operating systems versions as well as Windows operating systems. So watch out for the subsequent session. We're going to discuss about agent-based server monitoring. The concept of remote monitoring can be extended to even desktop class operating systems, but typically monitoring happens on server-based systems, but you can also monitor any Unix-based desktop class machines as well as Windows-based desktop class machines using the similar and same concept. So the same concept can be extended to even desktop class systems if you intend to do monitoring of desktop class systems as well. The prerequisites for monitoring, especially for Unix and Linux-based systems, SSH has to be enabled because that's the methodology by which the virtual infrasense sensor remotely connects to the Unix systems using SSH protocol running over port 22, which is the standard protocol, secured protocol for SSH. And if you are running SSH on any custom SSH port, that is also supported on a per individual device basis. You can set up individual port numbers on which SSH is enabled and customize the monitoring. And you also need the SSH username and password and for provisioning the device for monitoring. And this SSH username and password need not be a root user or super user in the Unix operating system. So even a regular username and password for a regular account is good enough to do the full-scale server-based monitoring. For Windows-based systems, WMI needs to be enabled. Enabling WMI is more complicated than SSH. SSH on the Linux systems comes by default. Unlike WMI on Windows systems, it's not enabled by default. So you'll have to go through the Microsoft documentation to look at how do you enable the WMI. And there are two separate processes in Windows systems called WMI and WinRM stands for this. WinRM stands for Windows Remote Management. So both these services has to be enabled and provisioned properly on Windows-based systems if you were to do WMI-based monitoring. And WMI uses port number 135 and WinRM uses port number 5985. And if you have any firewalls which are in between our sensors and the targeted servers which are intending to do monitoring, so for Linux-based systems, port 22 or your custom port, whatever you're using, needs to be opened up in the firewall. And likewise, for Windows-based systems, you need to open up port 135 and 5985 for WMI polling. And for WMI provisioning, again, there are various means and mechanisms for provisioning WMI on Windows-based systems. We're going to discuss that in a separate topic. If you intend to provision WMI, how do you enable those things on the Windows-based systems as a separate topic? But this session assumes that WMI is enabled and provisioned, and you're going to continue to do the monitoring after the provisioning. And for WMI, again, you need to know the WMI username and password. Typically, these are usernames which are provisioned directly from the Active Directory for all the domain computers which are part of the Windows domain. And this WMI username and password need not be an administrator user. It can be a regular WMI user which has privileges to do the monitoring capabilities. We're going to also take a look at troubleshooting in this session. If you enable the monitoring, remote monitoring, and if remote monitoring is not working for any reason, what all problems can actually occur in the solution. So typically when you enable the configuration in the UI, the configuration gets pushed to the infrasense sensor. And we're going to take a look at what happens in the infrasense sensor and the polling status and how do you see the data in the dashboard to make sure that you have the data coming in all the way from the server back to the dashboard. So the topic covers how do you provision the devices for monitoring and how do you check the data. We're going to take a look at all the dashboards which are related to server health monitoring in the next upcoming session. And that session will be focused on all the dashboards for server health monitoring. All right, so let's get started with server health monitoring, which is the topic for the discussion today. And let's get going to Enterprise 360. So when you launch Enterprise 360, when you log in on the entity configuration, if you launch entity configuration, let me refresh the dashboard here. So going to entity configuration in Enterprise 360, which is where you will start provisioning the devices for monitoring. On the left-hand side, you can navigate into entity configuration as you can click here. You can notice here, there is an option here called host. This is the place where you will actually enable the servers for monitoring. So entity type host is the monitoring for different types of devices. Again, we call it as host because you can actually monitor both the server class systems and desktop class systems. So that's the reason why we give the nomenclature as host. So you have two options here. You can actually add a new host, or you can actually upload the host. And there are different ways by which you can actually provision the servers for monitoring. The simplest way is a manual configuration where you're going to add servers individually one by one. So you can choose add new host. And here in the config type, you have to choose the option as host. So choose the option as host, and depending on what you have enabled, whether you are going to monitor a Linux-based system or a Windows-based system. If you are intending to monitor a Linux-based systems, choose SSH. You will also have to select the sensor. The sensor has to be the infrasense sensor. If you have multiple sensors, the list of sensors will arrive here one by one, and you can decide on which infrasense sensor you want to provision this device for monitoring. So choose the appropriate infrasense sensor. You're supposed to give the IP address of the machine here, the server IP address. You can give the actual server IP address. And typically server IP address are constant and they don't intend to change in a network. So make sure that the IP addresses don't change, because the communication for remote monitoring always happens over the IP address. You can give a description of the server which you intend to monitor, whatever name you want to give, whether it's a database server, application server, web server, whatever the case may be. And you can also give username and password, right? So depending on the system, what you're monitoring, in this case, you're choosing SSH, which means that this is a Linux-based system. You're going to give the Linux username and password right here, right? And if it's a Windows-based system, you're going to give the WMI username and password. That's the only difference. So for WMI, the port is 135 standard port. For SSH, it's going to be port 22. You can also change the port number. The standard port is 22, but unless you have changed the standard port to run SSH on a different port on the server side, you don't want to change this. But if you have indeed changed the SSH port on the server side, you can actually change that here as well. And you can also give the polling interval. The polling interval by default is 5 minutes. So you are not required to change this, which means that every 5 minutes the polling will actually happen. So reducing the polling interval to lesser than 5 minutes will increase the overload on the server. More data is going to get polled at lower granularity, which might cause overhead into the server. So 5 minutes is a very standard configuration, which brings the data once in 5 minutes. But if you intend to do more real-time monitoring on some specialized servers where you are troubleshooting certain problem, you can go up to even 1 minute and reduce this granularity to 1 minute only on critical servers. So it is not recommended that you enable 1 minute polling on all servers by default, which can cause a lot of overhead in data on the server side as well as data handling on the Enterprise 360 side. In some of the cloud-based environments, especially public cloud environments, there is no concept of password especially for compute instances which are running Linux compute instances in public cloud like AWS and others. The password is available as a PEM file-based authentication. So we fully support the PEM file-based authentication for cloud servers. So if you're intending to add a cloud server and if you don't have a password and the authentication happens via PEM file-based authentication, you can choose the PEM file directly here and point it to the PEM file and attach the PEM file, right? And once you are done, you save the configuration. And once you save the configuration, this configuration will be pushed to the infrasense, and infrasense will connect to this particular server 1.5. In this example, do a remote SSH connection and start the monitoring immediately. In case of WMI, it's going to actually pass on this configuration to the WMI polar. The infrasense sensor knows which WMI polar it is connected to. And if you have established the WMI polar, it will push this configuration to the WMI polar, and the WMI polar will poll this machine over the credentials what you have actually provided here for WMI and get the statistical information continuously, right? So this is the methodology for adding manual configuration. You can also ease the configuration by doing a bulk upload feature here. If you have hundreds of servers, you don't want to add each of them individually. So the bulk upload functionality will come into handy. So you can say upload host. You can download the CSV format and you can upload all the information in the CSV format. So the information typically whatever you enter inside the CSV is very similar to what you will do when you add the new host right here. So whatever information it asks you here is the same information which you need to provide in the CSV format. So list down all the information like IP address and protocol and username and password and port number and polling interval and the sensor name, everything inside the CSV file. And you can upload the host, and you can once you create the CSV file, upload the CSV file right here and import the CSV file. And once you import it, all the devices will be automatically provisioned for monitoring. So the bulk upload feature will help you to provision the devices quicker and faster by using the upload functionality here. So another option is available, which is the discovery option. In the discovery option, you can enable server discovery on different kinds of subnets. So here you can see we have enabled a server discovery here. You can take a look at this configuration. When you say add new, you can select the sensor on which you want to do the discovery. If all your servers are located in specific subnets, you can give the subnets. You can come and give one subnet at a time. And you have to enable the TCP based discovery because this is going to happen over TCP. And you can also enable whether you want to do WMI discovery or SSH discovery. So both options are available. If you choose both the options, you'll have to give WMI username and password credential and SSH username and password credential. And once you save this configuration, the discovery process will be provisioned on the infrasense sensor immediately. And it will swipe through the 1.0 subnet looking for all Windows servers and Linux servers, which are alive in the network. And any of the device which is alive in the network, it will try to identify whether it's a Windows or a SSH or a Linux-based system. And it will try to use these credentials to authenticate. And if the authentication succeeds, then those devices will be automatically provisioned for monitoring. So this is the discovery process, which will help to do the discovery of devices. One of the critical requirements for the discovery process is that you should maintain a common WMI username and password for all Windows systems and a common SSH username and password for all Unix or Linux-based systems. So if you maintain it that way, you can enable the discovery process. The discovery process also runs on a daily schedule. It also runs immediately when you start the discovery and save the discovery process. But subsequently, it will run on a daily basis. And if any new servers have come into the network which authentication succeeds, then those devices or servers will be automatically enabled for monitoring. So typically, if you are enabling monitoring for desktop class systems, it is always recommended that you maintain common WMI usernames and passwords, which are directly provisioned through Active Directory or domain controller. And any desktop class system which you have enabled WMI, and if the authentication succeeds, all the systems will be automatically enabled for monitoring through the discovery process. So again, to summarize, there are three options. Either you can do the discovery process, or you can add them individually one by one, or you can actually do a bulk upload functionality. Subsequently, once you have done all the provisioning and everything on a day-to-day basis, new servers might come, which you want to add individually. Then you can also use the individual add new host option to add them individually as well. Yep. So that is the way you enable the monitoring. Now, once you enable the monitoring, the system automatically processes the configuration, pushes it to InfraSense, and starts the data polling. So you should expect to see the data. If everything works well, you should expect to see the data in the server monitoring dashboard. So we're going to discuss about all the dashboards which are related to server monitoring and server health in the subsequent sessions. But if you see the data coming from the server directly, as you can see here, when you launch the server monitoring dashboard, so look at the server IP address which you just added. Let's say we added this server IP address called 1.40. If the data starts coming immediately after 5 minutes, then the polling and everything is working fine, and the server monitoring is already up and running, right, continuously, right? So you don't need to do any troubleshooting if the data shows up in the dashboard. Now, if the data does not show up in the dashboard, that is when you need to start the troubleshooting. And how do you start the troubleshooting? The first and foremost troubleshooting you need to do is you need to go to the infrasense sensor. Now let's jump into the infrasense sensor and take a look at what happens on the infrasense sensor. So log into the infrasense sensor, which is running on the Ubuntu operating system, and log into the su prompt and navigate to this directory called user local thought data infrasense bin, right? So make sure that in this directory, the infrasense process is running. If you run /ps, you can see whether the infrasense process is running or not. You can see the th data, RSSH agent, and you can also look at the infrasense sensor. These two processes and everything, all the other processes should be running properly. And you can also use the command tail -f. There is a log file in this directory called td_rssagent.log. Now, this is the log file which actually shows you what is happening with respect to those devices, right? So any devices which are getting monitored, you will get to see the data in this particular log. Continuous logs will keep coming, and you will get to see what's going on, right? If you're looking at a particular server IP address, you can also give a particular server IP address of interest, something like this, right? So you can look at, let's say, last 1,000 lines. You can give last 1,000 lines, and we're looking at whether that server is actually getting polled properly or not, right? So if you look at here, this command tail -n1000 -f RSS agent log will show you last 1,000 lines and filter for the data on this particular server IP address. If you see the IP address and if you see the collection sample done, log messages, which means that monitoring is working absolutely fine, right? Which means that the configuration what you enabled in Enterprise E360 has come into infrasense sensor. It has read the configuration. It has provisioned the device for monitoring, and the monitoring is already on, right? So if you can also see the statistical information of the device here. You can type the command /stats, and you can give the IP address of the device which we are trying to troubleshoot, right? So you can see if you say /stats, that IP address right here, you can see that the host 1.158 is working. Reporting has started for this particular device, and the data collection statistics is continuously increasing. So this is the statistical information what you see here, and you should see last received the number should keep on increasing, right? So if you look at this table, and this number is continuously increasing, which means that the data polling is continuously going on, which means that server monitoring is working, right? So if you see that the data polling is not working, you will see nil values in these counters, which will indicate that the polling is not working anymore, right? Or for some reason, or whatever the reason, yeah. Now, why the polling is not working? For some reason, if the polling is not working or anything, you will get to see that in the Enterprise 360 itself. You don't need to go back to infrasense. So you launch the discovered devices dashboard, and you take a look at a particular server of interest. Let's say you can see here. No, you can see here this particular server is not getting monitored. It's down because there is no route to the host. Connectivity, there is a connectivity failure between infrasense and that particular device, right? So for each and every device, if it is down and the data polling is actually not going on, it was going on for now, for some reason it is down. You'll get to understand why it is actually down, right? So you can see the discover devices dashboard and understand what kind of a problem could be going on to collect the data remotely from that particular device, right? Sometimes it can be an authentication failure. Sometimes it can be no route to host. Sometimes it can be a polling failure. It can, a lot of kind of problems can occur. So you can pinpoint and troubleshoot that kind of a problem. Now, one another thing which, if you are using the discovery process for server monitoring, it is possible that there are many servers which do not, have the similar kind of an authentication, whatever username and password you have given, and authentication can actually fail on multiple devices. So if you enable discovery and if you see all these devices, it only means that these devices authentication failed. Although they were discovered in the network, they were not provisioned for monitoring. So typically you don't want to see list of devices in this particular table. It only means that you enabled the discovery process, but you have not made sure that the authentication what you are giving is enabled on these devices, hence the authentication has failed, hence they are not provisioned for monitoring, right? So typically you don't expect a list of devices here, right? So this list has to be empty, which means that all the devices which you enabled for monitoring are getting monitored and authentication is working fine. Yeah. So those are the ways you can actually troubleshoot and find out if there is any server which is not getting monitored after you added in Enterprise 360. So that's it for this particular session. In the subsequent session, we're going to talk about server monitoring dashboards. How do you troubleshoot servers in depth? What are all the different dashboards which are available in Enterprise 360? We're also going to discuss about how do you do agent-based monitoring for both Windows-based systems as well as Linux-based systems if remote monitoring or agentless monitoring is not feasible. So agentless monitoring does not add any overhead, but if for some reason you don't want to do remote monitoring either for Windows system or for Linux system, we provide the agent softwares which you can put on the systems, and that also can do the monitoring. We'll discuss that topic also in the subsequent sessions. So thank you for your time, and hope it helps in understanding how server monitoring, agentless server monitoring works in Enterprise 360. We look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you.